There are moments in life when you feel completely alone, not because people left, not because love disappeared, but because something unseen moved them away, and the silence that followed wasn't random, it wasn't accidental, and it certainly wasn't cruelty from the universe. You didn't imagine the isolation, you didn't exaggerate the distance, and you are not being punished for existing as you are. You are here because something extraordinary happened in the spiritual realm, and no one ever explained it to you. There was a moment, quiet, ordinary, easily forgotten by the world, where you chose compassion instead of cruelty, mercy instead of retaliation, restraint instead of revenge. And that decision did not look heroic. It did not feel powerful. It did not come with applause. It felt like swallowing your pride, like staying silent when you could have spoken, like walking away when you had every right to strike back. And in that moment you did something most people never do. You broke a spiritual cycle. You stopped a chain reaction of harm, and without knowing it, you saved an angel, not with wings, not with light, not with miracles, but with obedience, integrity, and restraint. And heaven noticed, because heaven always notices when someone chooses righteousness without reward, when someone obeys truth even when no one is watching, when someone refuses to become what hurt them. And from that moment forward, things began to shift around you. Certain people grew distant, conversations faded, invitations stopped, and paths quietly closed. Not because you were rejected, but because protection was activated. When an angel is spared, alignment changes. When a soul passes a test unseen, access is restricted. And when you are marked for preservation, chaos loses permission to reach you. So the separation you feel is not abandonment. It is insulation. It is the spiritual equivalent of being moved behind the walls before the storm hits. Before we go deeper, pause for a moment. If this message resonates with your spirit, comment, "I am chosen" below. Like this video, so it reaches others who are in this same hidden season. And subscribe, because messages like this do not find people by accident. Now take a breath, because what comes next requires stillness. Your loneliness is not a void, it's a corridor. Your silence is not emptiness, it's preparation. Heaven removed distractions so clarity could settle, removed noise so wisdom could surface, removed familiar faces so your identity could no longer be negotiated. This season is not about punishment. It is about positioning. When angels are spared, destinies accelerate quietly. When integrity is chosen in the dark, authority is formed in the light, and you are not alone because you were forgotten. You're alone because you were trusted. Now, let's dive deeper. Point 1. The loneliness that was assigned, not chosen. Chosen 1. The loneliness you feel did not arrive because you failed socially, emotionally, or spiritually. It arrived because your nervous system, your intuition, and your spiritual awareness crossed a threshold that most people never reach. When that threshold is crossed, the environment that once felt familiar begins to feel hollow. Conversations lose depth, relationships lose resonance. Even background noise starts to feel intrusive, almost aggressive to your inner stillness. This is not depression, and it is not rejection. This is differentiation. You're experiencing what happens when your internal world expands faster than your external reality can keep up. Growth creates distance before it creates alignment. God does not allow expansion without containment, and loneliness is that container. It is the protective boundary placed around you so that your identity does not get diluted before it stabilizes. If people had remained close while you were transitioning, they would have unconsciously anchored you to an older version of yourself. Their expectations, habits, and emotional demands would have slowed the transformation. So, separation became necessary. This phase feels quiet, but it's not empty. It is densely active beneath the surface. Your mind is reorganizing itself. Your values are recalibrating. Your emotional reflexes are slowing down, becoming more deliberate, more precise. You are being trained to sit with yourself without external validation, without applause, and without reassurance. This is essential because the calling placed on you requires self-containment. You are learning how to remain steady when nothing mirrors you back. You are learning how to hear God without the interference of other voices. This solitude is forging spiritual weight, not fragility. You're not being isolated because you are weak, broken, or behind. You're being isolated because you're becoming unshakable, and unshakable people are always built in silence before they are revealed in power. Point 2. The moment you saved an angel without knowing. There was a moment in your life when you chose restraint over reaction, and it did not announce itself with thunder or signs. It arrived quietly, disguised as an ordinary decision, but it carried eternal weight. Perhaps you walked away when retaliation would have felt justified, even satisfying. Perhaps you told the truth when a lie would have preserved your reputation, your comfort, or your advantage. Perhaps you extended kindness when indifference would have cost you nothing. On the surface, it seemed small, forgettable, and easily overlooked. But in the unseen realm, that moment registered as alignment. Angels are not always encountered through spectacle, visions, or dramatic interventions. Often they are present at moral pressure points, those private crossroads where your character is tested without witnesses, applause, or immediate reward. You passed a test that required no audience, and that is precisely why it mattered. You chose integrity when there was nothing to gain and nothing to lose externally. In spiritual terms, this is known as trustworthiness under obscurity. It is the rare ability to remain aligned with divine order even when silence surrounds the choice. When Scripture speaks about entertaining angels unaware, it is not limited to physical hospitality or literal encounters. It is behavioral alignment. It is living in agreement with divine law when no one is watching and no outcome is promised. In that moment, you demonstrated that your values were not performative but internal, not situational but rooted. That single decision triggered a shift in spiritual oversight. From that point forward, your life entered a monitored state, not as punishment, but as preparation. This is why certain things stopped working for you, even though they once came easily. This is why shortcuts began to feel heavy, uncomfortable, and almost impossible to justify internally. This is why your conscience became louder, more precise, and less tolerant of compromise. You were no longer permitted to move the way you once did because you had proven you could be trusted with more later. Influence requires restraint before it is granted. Authority requires discipline before it is visible. You were marked not for elevation yet, but for refinement. The silence that followed was not abandonment, it was confirmation. You were being shaped in private for responsibilities that would one day demand strength without ego, power without corruption, and leadership without applause. That moment of restraint was not the end of something. It was the quiet beginning of being set apart. Point 3. Why God was impressed by your silence and obedience. God is not impressed by performance. He is impressed by internal alignment, by what happens in the unseen spaces where no one is applauding and no one is watching, where choices are made without witnesses and integrity is either honored or abandoned. You did not force outcomes when impatience whispered that you should. You did not manipulate people to secure advantage, and you did not disguise revenge as justice to soothe wounded pride. Instead, you allowed life to unfold without betraying who you were becoming, and that restraint is rare. Most people behave ethically only when eyes are on them, only when reputation is at stake, and only when consequences are immediate. You behaved ethically in solitude, when shortcuts were available and excuses would have been accepted. That is why protection was activated instead of exposure, why unseen hands redirected moments that could have destroyed your future. This is why certain doors closed without explanation, conversations ended abruptly, and opportunities dissolved just as you reached for them. It was not punishment, it was prevention. God was not withholding from you. He was shielding you. He knew what you were becoming before you could articulate it, before your confidence caught up to your calling. He understood that premature access to you would attract people who would drain, distort, or derail your growth, creating damage that would take years to undo. So he slowed your external environment while accelerating your internal formation, stretching your discernment, sharpening your patience, and strengthening your spiritual spine. What you call loneliness is heaven calling you inward, away from noise, away from dependency on validation, and away from borrowed identity. It is God teaching you how to hear Him without constant stimulation, how to trust timing without visible proof, and how to stand firm without applause or reassurance. This phase builds spiritual muscle, the kind that cannot be developed in crowds or comfort. Without this strengthening, later elevation would crush you, responsibility would overwhelm you, and influence would expose weaknesses you were never given time to heal. God was impressed not because you were flawless, but because under pressure you remained aligned, because in confusion you chose clarity, and because in isolation you chose obedience over impulse. This alignment is what qualifies you, not for attention, but for longevity, not for applause, but for authority, not for escape, but for endurance. Point 4. Loneliness as a divine protection phase. This season is protective by design, and nothing about it is accidental. When something of high value is being refined, it is never left exposed or handled casually. Think of how gold is processed. It is separated from everything familiar, subjected to intense heat, isolated from contamination, and purified in silence long before it is ever displayed or trusted. You are undergoing a similar process, not externally, but psychologically and spiritually. The absence of people around you is not the absence of purpose, it is the deliberate reduction of interference. Too many voices distort direction. Too much access weakens clarity. Right now, your nervous system is being recalibrated so that chaos no longer feels normal and peace no longer feels boring. What once felt familiar now feels draining because your inner baseline has shifted. Your intuition is sharpening because silence amplifies perception. Without constant noise, you can hear what was always there but previously drowned out. This is why you are more observant now, why patterns stand out, why inconsistencies in others are impossible to ignore. You are seeing energy, not just behavior. You are sensing motives, not just words. Superficial interactions exhaust you because your system no longer tolerates what lacks depth or truth. This does not mean you are becoming antisocial or cold. It means you are becoming discerning. Discernment is not rejection, it is precision. God often uses loneliness as a shield, especially for chosen ones, because proximity is how identities are absorbed. If you were constantly surrounded by people who benefited from your old version, you would subconsciously keep performing it. Growth would threaten their comfort, so access had to be restricted, not as punishment, but as preservation. not to break you, but to protect what is forming. In isolation, false attachments dissolve. Old coping mechanisms lose relevance. You are no longer regulated by external validation, only by internal alignment. This is where strength is quietly rebuilt. This is where self-trust becomes unshakable. This is where your sense of self stops being negotiable. The loneliness you feel is not emptiness, it is space. Space for clarity, space for authority, space for a version of you that cannot survive constant interruption. When the season ends, it will not be because you chased people, but because you no longer need them to confirm who you are. Point 5. Why people began to misunderstand and drift away. When your internal structure changes, the world around you feels it before you ever announce it, because transformation is first energetic before it is verbal, and those who relied on your predictability sense the shift immediately. You no longer explain yourself the same way, not because you have nothing to say, but because you no longer need validation to confirm your truth. You no longer seek approval, because you have learned that approval often comes at the cost of self-abandonment. You no longer overextend emotionally, pouring from an empty place just to maintain harmony. To them, this feels like distance, like something has been taken away. To you, it feels like clarity, like finally standing upright after years of bending. You are no longer leaking energy, trying to be understood by people who were never listening to begin with. This alone disrupts old dynamics, because confusion arises in those who are accustomed to your constant availability, your quick replies, your emotional labor, and your willingness to soften yourself for their comfort. When that access disappears, they scramble to make sense of it, and so they label you cold, distant, or changed. They are correct. You have changed, but not in the way they think. You have not hardened, you have stabilized, you have become internally anchored, rooted in discernment rather than reaction. You are no longer reactive, driven by guilt, fear, or the need to keep the peace. You are responsive, intentional, and selective, and this feels threatening to those who benefited from your emotional accessibility without ever protecting it. When God allows this misunderstanding, it is not punishment, it is protection. Misinterpretation becomes a divine filter, quietly separating those who were attached to your former self from those who can meet you at your current level of integrity. The ones who leave reveal that they were connected to what you provided, not who you were becoming. The ones who stay do not demand explanations. They recognize the shift and respect it. This season teaches you that alignment feels quieter than attachment, less dramatic, but far more peaceful. What remains later will not cling to your energy or require you to perform your worth. It will resonate naturally with who you are now, anchored, whole, and no longer available for roles that required you to disappear to be accepted. Point 6. The invisible shield, operating around you now. There are things happening around you that you are not aware of, movements behind the curtain that never announce themselves, conversations that quietly dissolve before your name is spoken, plans that collapse at the last moment, opportunities that disappear just as they seem within reach, and your mind may label these moments as loss or bad timing. But this is not loss. This is filtration. This is a deliberate narrowing of your path, so that what cannot walk with you is removed before it has the chance to interfere. Divine protection rarely arrives as rescue. It arrives as prevention. It looks like missed connections and unexplained delays, like doors that never open and messages that never get returned, but what it is truly doing is rerouting harm before it ever reaches your life. You are being spared situations that would have cost you clarity, peace, momentum, and years of recovery. This is why, even when circumstances feel uncertain, you notice something unusual within yourself. A strange calm, a grounded stillness, an absence of panic that does not match the external situation. Your nervous system already knows what your mind has not yet caught up to. It knows you are being held. Angels do not work in dramatic displays. They do not announce themselves with noise or spectacle. Their work is quiet, subtle, almost invisible, because their role is not to impress, but to protect. They move ahead of you, adjusting timelines, dissolving connections, redirecting outcomes so that what would have harmed you never gains access. You are being shielded from emotional entanglements that would have drained your energy, from financial traps disguised as opportunities, from relational dynamics that would have slowed your growth and pulled you off alignment. What feels like isolation is often insulation. What feels like delay is often precision. This shield did not appear randomly. It exists because of trust that was established earlier, through obedience when it was inconvenient, through integrity when compromise would have been easier, through restraint when reaction was tempting. Protection follows obedience because obedience signals readiness. It tells the unseen that you can be trusted with more, that you will not misuse access, that you are aligned enough to be preserved. So when things fall away without explanation, do not chase them. When paths close abruptly, do not force them open. Something is being filtered out for your sake, and what remains will meet you without resistance, without confusion, and without cost to your peace. Point 7. The purpose of the wait and what comes next. This phase feels long because it is stabilizing something permanent, not temporary, not seasonal, not circumstantial, but structural at the level of who you are becoming. God is not delaying you, and He is not testing your patience for sport. He is anchoring you so that when movement begins, it doesn't collapse under pressure. Anything that is meant to last must be built slowly enough to withstand weight, and the weight coming toward your life is influence. Subtle, unseen at first, but real. Influence over decisions, over people, over environments, over outcomes. That kind of influence requires emotional regulation, so you are not reactive, spiritual discernment, so you are not deceived, and internal authority, so you do not need permission to stand where you are placed. Without this season, you would outsource your worth. You would seek validation from voices that cannot follow you into the next terrain. You would negotiate your boundaries with people who benefit from you staying small. This is why the separation feels intense. This is why conversations have gone quiet. This is why distractions no longer satisfy you. The waiting is not passive. It is active integration. Your nervous system is recalibrating. Your intuition is sharpening. Your ego is being quieted so your discernment can speak clearly. God is teaching you how to sit with yourself without escaping, how to hear without noise, and how to move without urgency. When this season lifts, it will not announce itself with fireworks or external applause. It will feel like clarity, alignment. Decisions will no longer require force. Timing will feel precise without effort. You will notice that what once drained you can no longer reach you. You will not chase what is coming because chasing belongs to lack, and lack no longer governs you. What is aligned will recognize you without pursuit. Doors will open because you fit, not because you pushed. Until then, remain contained. Remain observant. Remain grounded. Do not mistake stillness for stagnation or silence for abandonment. Your loneliness is not punishment. It is assignment, specific protection. It is insulation from interference while something sacred stabilizes within you. You were never left. You were repositioned.